Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are focusing on what I think is one of the most dynamic and maybe complex challenges in the global economy, and that's effective communication in, the huge world of hospitality. We're doing a deep dive into cultural awareness and hospitality communication.
Yeah, and this couldn't be more relevant. I mean, hospitality covers everything. You've got international airline crews, five-star resorts, local tourism spots. It's all fundamentally global, and it really relies on thousands of these tiny, successful interactions every single day.
Right.
So our mission today is to kind of distill why cultural awareness isn't just a soft skill. It's not a nice to have. It is an absolute necessity for, well, for staying in business. And we'll look at some practical steps people can take.
Yeah, we want to give you that shortcut, right?
Okay.
Moving past the sort of common sense stuff to the things you can actually implement. The goal here is to get beyond just, avoiding an awkward mistake
Hmm.
and into actively building those deep connections that, turn a one-time guest into someone who's loyal for life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the core idea is that in a field where you're welcoming countless nationalities every day, communication is the absolute bedrock of service.
Hmm.
If you can get that cultural competence right, you're not just selling a room or a meal. You're creating an experience of real connection and respect.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Let's start with the risk factor because that's always where the urgency is.
Mm.
We talk about how diverse the hospitality industry is. And that's not just the guests, it's the teams themselves.
Yeah.
And you could have a front desk team with 6 different nationalities,
Serving guests from a dozen more.
all in this
Yeah.
high stress, high expectation environment.
And that intense diversity, I mean, that's where communication can just fail. And it's often not about language. It's not that you don't understand the words. It's a profound misreading of all the other cues, the nonverbal stuff, the context.
Right.
So we have to move beyond just saying, oh, be aware of cultural differences and actually look at how communication breaks down.
So give us the specifics because I think a common critique is that advice on body language is just, it's too generic.
It is. It totally is. So let's take a simple gesture. The thumbs up. The sources are really clear on this. If you're working with guests from, say, parts of West Africa or the Middle East, a thumbs up isn't a sign of good job. It can be seen as a really vulgar insult.
Wow. Okay.
So in those regions, the universally accepted gesture is maybe a simple nod, a respectful nod, or even a slight bow. Not that casual American, everything's great sign.
That's a great example of moving from, be careful with gestures to here is what you should do instead.
Hmm.
What about something a bit more subtle like how fast you talk or how you disagree with someone?
This is where understanding the difference between high context and low context communication is just invaluable.
Okay.
So in a low context culture, think Germany or the US, communication is expected to be direct. It's transparent, it's explicit. If a guest has a problem, they will tell you plainly, this is wrong.
No ambiguity.
None. And internally, if a manager gives a directive, it's straightforward. But now, consider a high context culture. You see this in much of Asia or Latin America. Communication there relies so much more on shared understanding, on history, on nonverbal cues.
Yep.
So a guest from a high context culture who is unhappy, well, they might never say the words, I am unhappy.
So you know.
They might communicate it through extreme politeness
Yeah.
or silence, or by asking a lot of indirect questions about a process, sort of waiting for you to read between the lines.
So if a manager, let's say from a low context background, tells their employee, just tell the guest the policy, don't waste time, that instruction itself is kind of culturally unaware. It could cause friction.
Absolutely. Another concept here that's vital is power distance.
Power distance.
Yeah. So if a guest comes from a culture with a high power distance, they see a really strong hierarchy between customers and staff. So they might be super hesitant to ask for something, to complain about a leaky faucet or ask for a different table. Because in their mind, challenging authority or making a special request is seen as rude.
So understanding these concepts helps the team be more proactive. You start to realize, okay, a guest's silence might not be them being confused. It might be deference. It kind of forces the staff to gently circle back and confirm what they need without being pushy.
Precisely, and that's the whole point. Understanding these variations just makes communication clearer, smoother, and frankly more respectful. You prevent those big business-damaging misunderstandings before they can even start.
Which brings us to the ultimate win, right? The external side of this. We all know that in hospitality, you don't really remember the thread count of the sheets.
No.
You remember how you felt. And cultural awareness is that secret ingredient that makes people feel genuinely welcomed,
Yeah.
genuinely respected,
It creates those little moments of recognition, and the sources are so clear on this. The small actions have a massive quantifiable impact on guest loyalty.
So let's detail those specific actions. What demonstrates real cultural awareness to a guest? I mean, beyond just translating the menu.
Well, it's about acknowledging their identity. For instance, making the effort to greet them in their native language. Even if it's just a simple, well-pronounced welcome or good morning, it
Hmm.
also means maybe flagging their file in the system for dietary preferences tied to their religion, like halal or kosher, and then proactively accommodating that without them having to ask over and over again. You're anticipating their needs.
And crucially, it's about adjusting your communication style. So if you have a guest who is very indirect, you need to match that. You need to meet them where they are. You can't just push for a quick, low context, what's the problem kind of resolution.
That is spot on. The second you force a high context guest into a very direct, almost confrontational conversation, they just withdraw. And their satisfaction with their experience just plummets. But when you adjust your pace, your vocabulary, your formality to match their preference, the guest feels truly heard.
And this is where we connect that warmth directly to business, to the competitive reality. What do the sources actually say about the measured payoff?
The payoff is it's substantial. When service is seen as personalized and culturally aware, the sources point to a really significant competitive edge. Satisfied guests, they're the ones who leave those powerful five-star reviews, which we all know are the lifeblood of your digital presence.
Of course.
And what's more, guests who feel culturally recognized are, statistically, much more likely to recommend the place. And crucially, they show up to a 20% uplift in repeat bookings.
20%?
20% uplift compared to guests who just got generic service.
That is massive.
Hmm.
So in this landscape, that emotional connection you get through respect, it's not a bonus.
Hmm.
It is the key driver of long-term revenue.
It's everything.
And that focus on connection, it can't just be outward-facing. So let's pivot to the internal advantage. As we said, hospitality teams are incredibly diverse. You've got talent from all over the globe working side by side.
And if communication is essential for the guest experience, it's doubly essential for workplace harmony and efficiency. When team members understand each other's cultural norms, their communication habits, the internal conflicts just decrease dramatically
Yeah.
because they stop misinterpreting intent.
Yeah, I can just imagine a common scenario, maybe in a kitchen. A high-context manager gives a subtle critique, intending for the employee to sort of absorb it slowly. But the low-context employee might think, well, there was no critique because it wasn't explicit. It wasn't direct.
Exactly. Or, think about humor. Humor is so context dependent. A joke that bonds one group of people might completely alienate or offend another. So training the team to recognize and respect those boundaries, it just fosters trust, and that leads to a better operational flow.
And better teamwork. Just a more harmonious work environment overall.
But it's actually beyond just harmony. There's a serious strategic advantage here for innovation.
How so?
Well, diverse teams naturally bring diverse ideas, diverse ways of solving problems, diverse understandings of what good service even means in different markets. For example, a diverse housekeeping team might realize that guests from a certain region prefer a different frequency of room service, or a specific amenity that a standard Western management team just never would have thought of.
I see.
So that diversity of thought leads directly to creativity, to innovation, and ultimately to smarter business solutions. You can capture new market segments.
So what we're seeing here is it's like a positive cycle.
Hmm.
Better cross-cultural communication leads to better teamwork, which leads to better, more responsive service. It creates value both inside the organization and for the guest. It's a system of continuous improvement.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, now let's address what I think is the biggest hurdle for anyone listening. The scale of this task. It can feel impossible. I mean, if I manage a global chain, am I really supposed to teach my staff every single etiquette rule for 200 different countries?
That's the question, isn't it? Do you have to become an anthropologist just to check in a guest? And the core insight from the sources is that no, you don't. Cultural awareness is not about striving for this kind of encyclopedic perfection. It's about demonstrating genuine, consistent willingness.
Okay, I agree with willingness, but how do you, practically speaking, how do you stop willingness from just turning into, like, awkwardness
Yeah.
or hesitation? I mean, doesn't the staff still need some concrete training to feel confident enough to even try?
That's a critical point, and yes, they do. They need that foundational training. But the long-term application really relies on humility and curiosity. The training gives you the basic frameworks like high context versus low context so you can recognize when a difference is happening. But the willingness gives you the courage to respond with empathy, to adapt.
And what are those simple, actionable steps that are rooted in that willingness?
Well, they include learning a few basic greetings, yes, but more importantly, it's about consistently showing empathy and just a fundamental open-mindedness in every interaction. And the key tool here is self-correction. If you accidentally make an assumption or use the wrong phrase, just apologize sincerely, and then you ask the guest, how can I better assist you?
That emphasis on actively avoiding assumptions, that feels huge. You're communicating that you respect the person enough to let them define their own needs, rather than you just imposing a stereotype on them.
Exactly. For example, never assuming you know why a guest is declining a certain food or why they seem hesitant to share information. So instead of saying, just tell me what's wrong, you say, I want to make sure you have the best experience. Please take your time to explain what you need. That little shift in phrasing, it builds massive trust. Even these small efforts are profoundly effective.
So if willingness is the attitude, what are the organizational strategies that need to back that up? I mean, how do businesses institutionalize this so it's not just relying on the goodwill of individual employees?
There are 4 specific interconnected strategies here that the source material details. Things that businesses have to implement to turn this into a reliable operational function.
Okay, let's start with the base layer. How do you teach this stuff effectively?
Number 1 is targeted training programs. And these have to move beyond just generic customer service role-playing. You need scenario-based modules that teach staff about common cultural flashpoints, about those nonverbal cues related to power distance. This is where you implement those frameworks, high context, low context, so staff can diagnose interactions on the fly.
So the training provides the foundational knowledge. What about the immediate practical barrier of, just language?
That's strategy number 2. Multilingual tools and technology. This means actively using professionally translated menus, signs, digital aids like live chat translation for reservations, and making sure your website is optimized for the languages of your key markets. It just reduces friction immediately.
Right. And the third strategy, that gets to the interaction itself. This is where the willingness meets the process.
That's active listening. And this is the practical side of cultural willingness. Staff have to be trained not just to listen for words, but to listen without judging, without making assumptions. For instance, training them to recognize that a long silence in a negotiation might just be reflection or respect, not confusion. You have to let guests fully express their needs without interruption, and then you confirm your understanding.
So it's about listening for the context and the relationship, not just the content of the request.
Precisely.
Right.
And then finally, the workforce itself becomes a tool for improvement.
Yeah.
And that's strategy number 4. A diverse workforce and leadership. By actively ensuring diversity in hiring at all levels, the organization gets a twofold benefit. Service quality is just organically enriched by different cultural perspectives on what excellence even is, and employees learn from each other through daily interaction. It reinforces the culture and challenges your blind spots from within.
So if you implement those 4 steps, training, tools, listening, and diversity,
Yeah.
you create an environment where guests feel respected and employees feel valued, which is, that's pretty much the definition of a successful hospitality business today.
It really is.
This has been a deeply practical deep dive. To sum up, cultural awareness, it's not optional anymore. It's absolutely essential for the hospitality industry. It prevents those painful misunderstandings, it dramatically improves guest satisfaction, which leads to that critical repeat business, and it builds much stronger, more resilient workplaces.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises an important question for you to think about. Investing your resources, your time, and your focus into learning about and accommodating other cultures, it doesn't just improve relationships and service quality, it directly provides a clear, competitive path to market expansion and, well, to better success.
What stands out to me is that the smallest, most informed gestures of respect really do yield the greatest returns in this people-centered industry. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and stay culturally aware.